June 6, 1944. 5:58 a.m. English Channel, 5 miles off Omaha Beach. The ramp is still up. Inside the wooden hull, 36 American soldiers sway shoulder to shoulder, rifles clutched tight, boots sliding on the wet deck. Diesel fumes burn the back of their throats. Salt spray slaps their faces through the open stern. The engine growls beneath them, loud, angry, alive. Seaman First Class Raymond Delgado grips the tiller. He is 20 years old. The gray line of France is growing larger through the mist. Then the first German shell lands. A geyser of water erupts 30 yards to port, drenching the men inside. Someone mutters a prayer. Another man laughs too loudly. The coxswain doesn't look back. The craft lurches forward again. You can almost feel it, the vibration of that engine under your boots, the weight of history pressing against a thin plywood hull, barely an inch thick. This boat was once a punchline. And in less than 2 minutes, its ramp will drop into hell. The Higgins boat, officially designated landing craft, vehicle, personnel, or LCVP, was never meant to impress admirals. It had no polished steel, no towering guns, no romance. It was boxy, blunt-nosed, built from plywood and steel plate. And in the 1930s, when Andrew Jackson Higgins first demonstrated his shallow-draft craft to the U.S. Navy, many officers were unimpressed. Some laughed outright. They saw a swamp boat, a Louisiana bayou contraption designed for trappers and oil men. Higgins had built them to skim across mudflats and slide over submerged logs. The bow rode high. The draft was barely 3 feet. It could grind itself onto shore and reverse out again without tugboats. But Navy traditionalists saw fragility, vulnerability, improvisation. Rear Admiral Ernest J. King reportedly dismissed early landing craft concepts as unnecessary. The U.S. had battleships, cruisers, carriers. Why would America need crude wooden barges? Higgins didn't argue politely. He invited them to New Orleans. There in the marshes, he ran his boat straight up onto the shore, spun them in tight arcs and backed them into open water again. He showed them how troops could disembark over the bow, no climbing over the sides, no chaos. Just a ramp. Down. Move. It was simple, brutally simple. But simple wins wars. By 1941, the world had changed. German blitzkrieg had crushed Poland and France. Amphibious invasions were no longer theoretical exercises. They were survival. When U.S. Marine Corps observers studied Japanese landings in China, they noticed something alarming. Traditional boats forced soldiers to climb over the sides, exposing them to fire and delaying movement. Higgins adapted again. He cut a ramp into the bow. That decision would alter the course of history. The LCVP could carry 36 fully equipped troops, or a jeep, or 8,000 pounds of cargo. It had a 225 horsepower gray marine diesel engine. Top speed, 12 knots. It wasn't glamorous, it wasn't armored like a tank. Its sides were thin, vulnerable. But it could do something no destroyer ever could. It could put men exactly where they needed to be. Directly onto a hostile beach. Back in the channel, Delgado's boat slams through the swell. Machine gun tracers begin stitching the water ahead. German MG-42s chatter from the bluffs, a mechanical tearing sound, fast and merciless. The coxswain shouts over the engine, 30 seconds. The soldiers check their weapons one last time. M1 Garand's, Browning automatic rifles, grenades taped tight against web gear. The boat grinds forward. Steel obstacles loom ahead, Belgian gates, wooden stakes tipped with mines. The tide is rising. There's no room to maneuver. Another explosion rocks the water nearby. A Higgins boat to the right bursts into flame. The men see it. No one speaks. This fragile craft, mocked as a swamp toy, is now the only thing standing between them and the Atlantic. And it keeps moving. At 6:30 a.m., thousands of identical silhouettes surge toward Omaha and Utah beaches. More than 20,000 Higgins boats were built during the war, many in Higgins Industries, massive New Orleans factories staffed by men and women working around the clock, welders, carpenters, teenagers barely out of school. They were producing a boat every few hours. Dwight D. Eisenhower would later say, "Andrew Higgins is the man who won the war for us. Not because he fired a gun, but because he solved a problem no admiral wanted to admit existed. How do you cross an ocean and land an army against fortified cliffs? The answer wasn't elegance. It was plywood, steel, and a ramp. The keel scrapes sand. Delgado throttles down. The engine roars against resistance. The ramp lever is pulled. For half a second, nothing happens. Then the steel door slams forward into the surf. Daylight floods the hull. Machine gun fire rips inside. Men fall before they can even step forward. The rest charge. Into the water, into smoke, into history. And the boat, riddled, shaking, waits for survivors to climb back aboard. Because it will go again. And again. And again. But this moment, this first brutal test, will decide whether Andrew Higgins' gamble was genius or catastrophe. The water is red before the second wave even arrives. Delgado doesn't watch the men who fell. He can't. Training takes over. Engine in reverse. Rudder hard to port. The Higgins boat grinds backward off the sand as bullets hammer its steel ramp like thrown gravel. The hull shudders but holds. Behind him, another LCVP charges forward through smoke so thick the shoreline disappears. German 88 artillery screams overhead. One shell lands short. Another lands long. The third finds a transport ship farther offshore, sending a black column of smoke into the morning sky. Chaos, absolute chaos. And yet the boats keep coming. At Omaha Beach, Major General Leonard T. Jarrow's V Corps is being cut apart. The 1st Infantry Division and 29th Infantry Division are pinned at the waterline, trapped between rising tide and murderous crossfire from WN-62 and WN-71. German strongpoints commanded by hardened Wehrmacht officers of the 352nd Infantry Division. The bluffs spit fire. But the Higgins boats do something critical, something invisible amid the horror. They do not stop. Wave after wave surges forward. Each LCVP deposits another 30 or 40 men directly onto the sand. No ladders, no scrambling over gunnels, no bottlenecks. Ramp down, move. It is brutal efficiency. Some boats return riddled with holes, some don't return at all. Coxswains, many barely out of high school, steer straight into gunfire because turning broadside would mean certain destruction. They aim for narrow gaps between obstacles. They memorize silhouettes in smoke. They follow compass headings even when they can no longer see land. Ensign Howard Vander Beek later described it as driving into a wall of noise. And still they drove. Utah Beach tells a different story. Strong currents push Brigadier General Theodore Roosevelt Jr.'s 4th Infantry Division nearly 2,000 yards south of their intended landing zone. A mistake or a miracle. When Roosevelt steps off his Higgins boat, cane in hand, bullets cracking overhead, he calmly announces, "We'll start the war from right here." The terrain is less fortified, the resistance thinner. And because the LCVPs can land almost anywhere, shallow draft, flat bottom, minimal clearance needed, they adjust instantly. No port facilities, no docks, no preparation. Just sand. The Germans had fortified expected landing zones. They had not fortified everywhere. That flexibility, born from swamp design, becomes decisive. Far offshore, battleships like USS Texas and USS Arkansas hurl 14-inch shells into German defenses. Destroyers creep dangerously close to shore, firing point-blank into bunkers. But none of that matters if the infantry cannot land. Warships can soften, aircraft can bomb. Only small boats can deliver men. By mid-morning, the Channel is a mechanical river of LCVPs. Over 156,000 Allied troops will cross to Normandy that day, Americans, British, Canadians. Thousands of them will step off Higgins' boats. The boats are everywhere now, bouncing through surf, taking on wounded, delivering engineers with Bangalore torpedoes, carrying radio operators clutching SCR-300 sets. Some boats ferry tanks, modified LCMs and LCTs follow behind, but it is the LCVP that dominates the shoreline, darting in and out like worker ants in a burning field. You can almost see the pattern: ramp down, men out, reverse, turn, repeat. A rhythm of invasion. But the cost is staggering. One LCVP approaches too slowly, engine trouble. The ramp drops. A burst from an MG-42 cuts down half the squad before boots touch sand. The coxswain is hit. The boat drifts sideways, vulnerable. Another boat strikes a submerged mine attached to a wooden obstacle. The explosion splits the hull. Men vanish beneath foam. Wood burns, steel twists, screams mix with engine noise. And yet, production lines back in New Orleans had prepared for this. Higgins Industries built over 12,000 LCVPs alone. Women riveters and black and white workers side by side in integrated factories, rare in 1940s America, assembling craft that would never return. They worked 24-hour shifts. They knew where those boats were going. The boats were expendable. The mission was not. By noon, something shifts at Omaha. Small groups of survivors begin climbing the bluffs. Naval gunfire inches closer. German fields of fire break down as communication lines snap under bombardment. What looked like massacre begins to resemble foothold. And it happens because enough boats got through. Enough ramps dropped. Enough men reached the sand. The Higgins boat was never designed to survive glory. It was designed to function. And it did. Back on the water, Delgado wipes blood from the deck with seawater. A new squad climbs aboard, faces pale, jaws set. He doesn't ask what happened to the last group. There's no time. He pushes the throttle forward again. Because the beaches are not secured yet. Because the bluffs are still firing. Because somewhere beyond that smoke lies France. And these thin wooden hulls, once laughed at in boardrooms, are now carrying the weight of liberation. But as night falls on June 6th, one question hangs over the Channel. If the Higgins boats had failed, would D-Day have collapsed before it ever truly began? New Orleans, Louisiana, 1943, midnight shift. The factory floor does not sleep. Arc welders spit white light across cavernous assembly halls. Rivet guns hammer in relentless rhythm. The smell of cut pine and hot steel mixes with sweat and machine oil. Outside, the Mississippi River slides past in darkness, unaware that history is being stacked in rows beneath corrugated metal roofs. Andrew Jackson Higgins walks the floor without ceremony. He is not tall, not polished, not Navy aristocracy. His suit is usually rumpled, his temper legendary. But he moves through the plant like a man who knows exactly what he's building, not boats, but leverage. Against Hitler. Against distance. Against time. By 1943, Higgins Industries has become something extraordinary. More than 20,000 workers, including women and black laborers hired in integrated teams, operate around the clock. In an America still divided by segregation, Higgins plants function on production logic, not prejudice. If you can weld, you weld. If you can rivet, you rivet. The war does not have patience for bias. LCVP hulls roll down assembly lines in skeletal stages. Steel ramps are hoisted into place. Gray marine diesel engines are lowered into compartments barely wider than a coffin. Wiring is threaded through ribs like nerves in a body. Each boat takes shape in days. Not months, days. At peak capacity, one completed landing craft slides out of the factory every few hours. Think about that. Every few hours, another 36-man doorway to Europe is born. But it wasn't inevitable. Years earlier, Higgins had been treated like an outsider, a brash boat builder from the bayou challenging naval orthodoxy. When he demonstrated his original Eureka boat, some officers saw innovation. Others saw insult. He had bypassed bureaucracy. He had gone straight to the Marines. And the Marines listened, because they were the ones who would have to hit beaches. Lieutenant Colonel Victor Brute Krulak studied Japanese landing operations in China and saw the weakness of side disembarking craft. He reported back with urgency. Future wars would demand speed, direct landings, surprise. Higgins provided the answer. Ramp in the bow. The Navy hesitated. Tradition is heavy. War is heavier. When the United States entered World War II after Pearl Harbor, hesitation evaporated. The scale of global conflict demanded tools no one had fully appreciated before. The Higgins boat went from curiosity to cornerstone almost overnight. Back in Normandy, June 7, 1944. The sea is calmer now. Bodies still drift near the tide line. Wrecked craft lie at awkward angles in the surf. German artillery fires intermittently, but the beachhead holds. And the boats are still working. LCVPs shuttle ammunition, rations, engineers, and wounded soldiers. They tow damaged craft. They retrieve men stranded on sandbars. They ferry bulldozers to clear obstacles. Their ramps slam down hundreds of times a day. Each impact dents steel. Each landing scrapes paint. Each mission risks another direct hit. But the design holds. Flat bottom, shallow draft, reinforced bow ramp, twin .30 caliber machine guns mounted at the stern for suppressive fire. Functional. Disposable. Essential. By the end of D-Day, over 800 Higgins boats have been committed to the Normandy landings alone. Across all Allied beaches, Omaha, Utah, Gold, Juneau. Sword variations of Higgins. Designs deliver the invasion force that will eventually total over 2 million men, passing through Normandy in the months that follow. The boats are not glamorous enough for headlines. But without them, there is no Overlord. No foothold. No march to Paris. No crossing of the Rhine. President Dwight D. Eisenhower would later say, plainly, "Andrew Higgins is the man who won the war for us." It sounds exaggerated. Until you imagine D-Day without landing craft capable of delivering infantry directly onto defended shores. Battleships cannot dock on sand. Aircraft cannot occupy ground. Armies cannot swim ashore under machine gun fire. Only small boats can bridge that final violent gap between sea and soil. In his New Orleans office, Higgins keeps a framed photograph of one of his boats grinding onto a foreign beach. He knows what it means. He also knows what it cost. Thousands of his craft will never return. Many lie splintered beneath Atlantic waves. Others rot quietly along European coasts, anonymous in victory. But that was always the point. The Higgins boat was never meant to be remembered. It was meant to deliver. And it did. On the bluffs above Omaha, American soldiers now look inland toward hedgerows and distant villages. The Atlantic roars behind them. The invasion has begun to feel irreversible. But here is the truth few people consider. Operation Overlord was balanced on wood and rivets. On a ramp hinge. On the stubborn belief of a Louisiana boat builder who refused to accept that tradition knew best. They laughed at his swamp boat. They called it fragile, impractical, unworthy of a great navy. Then 156,000 soldiers crossed the channel. And when the ramps dropped, the laughter stopped. But one final question remains. What happens to the tools of victory once the war moves inland and history forgets who carried it ashore? August 25, 1944, Paris. Church bells ring across the city as French civilians flood the streets. American tanks from General Philippe Leclerc's 2nd Armored Division roll past cheering crowds. GIs lean from turrets, grinning, exhausted, stunned by the sound of celebration instead of artillery. The war has moved inland. The beaches of Normandy are already fading into memory. But if you walk back down toward the coast, away from the flags and the crowds, you will still find them. Half buried in sand. Rusted. Splintered. Higgins boats. Some sit upright as if waiting for another tide. Others lie broken against obstacles they never cleared. Their ramps are twisted open, frozen in permanent descent. The tide washes through them indifferently. They are no longer needed. And war is ruthless with what it no longer needs. As Allied forces push toward the Seine and beyond, the tempo changes. The Higgins boats continue working through the summer, unloading supplies, vehicles, artillery. The artificial mulberry harbors rise offshore, steel and concrete marvels extending the invasion's reach. But gradually, the spotlight shifts to tanks, Shermans advancing through hedgerows, P-47 Thunderbolts roaring overhead, generals making headlines. The boats slip into the background. Just tools. Just transport. Yet every mile gained inland traces back to that first brutal morning, when plywood hulls met machine gun fire. Without those landings holding, nothing that followed would have mattered. Back in New Orleans, Andrew Higgins does not celebrate loudly. Production continues. Pacific operations now demand attention. Tarawa, Saipan, Iwo Jima. Marines rely on similar craft to cross coral reefs and volcanic beaches under Japanese fire. The Higgins design adapts again and again. Different engines, reinforced hulls, variants capable of carrying tanks. But the principle remains the same: get men to the shore fast. And give them a fighting chance. By war's end, Higgins Industries will produce more than 20,000 landing craft of various types, an industrial miracle born from swamp water and stubbornness. Yet post-war contracts evaporate almost as quickly as they arrived. The Navy no longer needs tens of thousands of small wooden assault craft. Factories shrink, orders dry up. Innovation in peacetime is not always rewarded the way it is in crisis. Years later, veterans return to Normandy. They stand on quiet beaches where children now build sandcastles. The bluffs are green. The bunkers are museums. Some of them remember the sound most clearly, not the artillery, not even the gunfire, but the metallic slam of a ramp hitting surf. That was the sound of decision. The sound of no turning back. You can imagine it: cramped darkness, diesel vibration, someone whispering a final word to himself, then light, then chaos. The boat behind you, the continent ahead, and nothing but courage in between. Historians often focus on strategy: Eisenhower's weather gamble, Field Marshal Erwin Rommel's absence from the front, the misdirection of Operation Fortitude. All of it mattered. But strategy is meaningless without execution. Execution requires tools. The Higgins boat was not glamorous enough for myth. It did not inspire speeches. It did not appear in victory parades. It simply carried men into history. Over 156,000 Allied troops landed in Normandy on June 6, 1944. Tens of thousands of them stepped off Higgins boats into water stained with smoke and fear. The boats absorbed the first impact. They bridged the final yards. They made Europe reachable. President Eisenhower once reflected that Higgins is the man who won the war for us. It sounds dramatic, until you strip the war down to its simplest truth. An army cannot liberate a continent if it cannot reach the shore. And on D-Day, the shore was everything. Today, a few restored LCVPs sit in museums, carefully painted, engines silent, ramps lowered for visitors who step aboard with curiosity instead of dread. Children walk inside and marvel at how small it feels. So small, they cannot quite imagine 36 men packed inside, cannot hear the engine, cannot smell the diesel and fear. But if you stand there long enough, if you close your eyes, you might almost feel it. The vibration, the weighting, the sudden drop of steel against sand, and the understanding that history sometimes turns not on massive battleships or towering bombers, but on a simple idea. A ramp in the bow. They laughed at the Higgins boat until it carried an army across the sea. And